Ladies and gentlemen, as Larry alluded to, the GRSB and what we are trying to achieve is to come to solutions, and to come to solutions on some of the subjects that we all feel very much and passionately about need some debate. It needs us to come together and discuss our ideas, and it's actually through that debate that not only do we discover our differences, but more often than not discover our similarities. It's one of the unique things I've noticed coming from the beef industry, and having spent 10 years in rural and remote areas around the world as an extension officer and then moving into the damn panda, is that it actually allows us to have a very frank discussion when you actually come into the room slightly nervous. It actually allows you to sort of put your views across more clearly and asks you and encourages you to do so. But what I've really noticed with the trust that's built at the GRSB over the last couple of years is our ability to listen. So when the organising committee started pulling together ideas for this conference, I suggested a debate. The idea that let's pull out one of these topics and discuss it in detail in a really robust and meaningful way. And it took a while to get their head around it. And only a minute ago, talking to Cameron Brewitt, did I finally understand why. When we talk about a debate in Australia, and I'll talk about the structure soon, we call it a mooting debate or an Oxford-style debate. This is not going to be like a presidential debate where I, as moderator, ask questions. It will be up to the participants on each team to put forward an argument and hear rebuttal and counter-argument from the other team. My job is simply to introduce them, pull them apart if it gets too tense, and to ring a bell if they run over time. So, ladies and gentlemen, today's topic is around efficiency. Does chasing efficiency lead to positive social and environmental outcomes? To argue that that statement is true, we have a positive team and a negative team. So to start the debate and to deliver some opening arguments, I'll get my notes, is Dr. Roger Cady. Many of us in the room would know Roger. He's been a stalwart of the GRSB for a long time, Secretary-Treasurer right now. He's a senior technical consultant for Elanco. He has 3 children, but I'm not allowed to call them children. He's a geneticist, so I guess I'll call them progeny, now that they're adults. He's in the model railways, genealogy. He's a hell of a good friend. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Roger Cady.
Thank you, Ian. And the nervous part is true. I stand in front of crowds a lot, but not quite in this kind of a forum. So we'll get started. Most of us in this room live and have experience living in a developed country. And that's our frame of reference and how we judge dynamics and so on. But in actuality, the land that we occupy as developed countries only is about 1/3 of the Earth's land surface and about 20% of the population that lives in this world. So that leaves 2/3, another 80% of areas that are developing, and we may not quite understand the challenges in those areas. So for that reason, I'm going to be speaking from a global perspective and not the perspective that we've talked about the last few days. Excuse me. Because of our relative wealth, we have a distorted view of what the challenges may really be on a global basis. So, secondly, I'll mention that efficiency, I think everybody understands, but just to make sure, that's the number of inputs per number of output. Or you can flip it around the other way to make sure you understand which way it's moving. But that's simply the definition, input divided by output. However, it's very important that we choose the correct measure of efficiency. And an example is, if we measure efficiency per animal, we may actually go in the wrong direction in terms of improving sustainability. We need to measure in terms of input per unit of food produced. And that will take us in the direction in terms of looking at environmental resources and costs of our production. So the first point I'd like to make is to talk about the population. And I know you've all seen the figures, 9+ billion people by 2050. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. That's another 2 billion people than we have today. There's 7.3 billion people today. we're looking at 2 billion more people. That's a 28% increase in the next 35 years. We also need to understand more. Typically, what we hear is just those numbers and we stop. And I believe that the image in most people's mind when we do that is there's more people. But what we're doing is living longer. It's not because of birth rates. Birth rates are actually declining everywhere. It has to do with age is increasing. We are increasing lifespan everywhere. So it's the equivalent of inviting people over for dinner and they decide to stay a whole nother day. And we have to feed them. Another aspect of that, because of the age, is the fastest growing segment of the population are people over 70. Not youth, it's the people over 70. And to illustrate this, the number of the number of people over 100 years of age is going to increase tenfold in the next 35 years. We're going to go from about 500,000 people in the world today over age 100 to over 5 million people over age 100. The nutritional requirements of aged people, and this is where I'm going to take a little debate with Dr. Hughes, actually is very protein intensive. Yes, we tend to eat less, and I also am able to look over and see maybe the end where it is. And my diet has changed, but my diet has actually increased the percentage of protein in order to maintain muscle mass. Older people lose muscle mass very quickly, and if protein is left out of older people's diet, it decreases rapidly. Now I see that clock is going backwards instead of forwards, so now I'm feeling a little bit better. The last point I'd like to make is the change in the demographics of that population, and that is the growth of the middle class. Of the 7 billion people that inhabit the world today, only approximately 1.5 billion live in a middle class. Very difficult to define the middle class. You cannot do it by how much income because we have different standards of living. And basically it's defined on as having discretionary income after you meet your basic needs of life. We're going to increase the number of people by another 3 billion people by the year 2030. What's the first thing people who have discretionary income buy? It's protein. Why? Because it tastes good. It enriches the diet. And so we know that demand is coming not just from more people, and we also know the protein demand is not just coming from feeding younger children, it's feeding older people as well. And it's also because people are going to have the power to buy that protein. Now let's look at another part of the challenge, which is the depletion of resources on this planet. We could use energy, we could use greenhouse gas formation and global warming. We could look at a number of things. I'm going to choose land because I can illustrate it fairly easily. Humankind has a habit of settling in a place, depleting resources, and moving on to where resources are more plentiful. This started with humankind's exodus out of Africa tens of thousands of years ago. History is replete with examples of people using up resources and moving on. I'm the great-great-great-grandchild of several families who emigrated to the United States out of Europe during one of the great migrations. If we look at United States history, the westward movement and development of the United States had a lot to do with the using up of soil and not being able to grow things and moving to where new soil is. When we move to new places, we often move to where people are already settled, and this causes civil strife. The difference today is, and why this is far more critical, is virtually all the inhabitable places of the world are inhabited. So there are no more places to move to find resources. We have to use our resources more appropriately. And if I use land as an example, and I wasn't allowed to use slides, so I have a little different demonstration here. If we think about this piece of paper as the surface area of the Earth, if we tear that paper in quarters and we have this much, this is about how much of this is land. And if we look at how much of this land is, I'm missing a piece of paper, so we'll do this. If we look at how much of this land is agricultural land, it's about this much, which is about a third of the land. This land would be equivalent to Europe. I need to get back to Europe, Africa, and Australia together. That leaves out all the land of Asia and Western Hemisphere, not in terms of that's where the land is located, but in terms of the landmass size. Okay, this is agricultural land. Of this agricultural land, 70% is grasslands and pasture, which cannot be converted to arable cropland. That's a third of this. And if we look at the rate that we're losing arable land, we're down to this. This little postage stamp sized piece of paper is the amount of arable land on the earth that we have to grow food, and virtually all of it is being farmed today in some way, shape, or form. So we're not going to be able to create more land. We have to use them more wisely. There are many other options to feeding the people we're talking about feeding. Certainly we waste far too much food. Especially in developed countries, we see food going off the table that could have been eaten. We lose it in processing. But the greater loss of food actually is in the developing world, where we have pre-harvest losses of crops that do not make it off the field, or crops that do not make it to a place where they can be distributed. In animals, and that is about mortality and morbidity. Sick animals do not produce. Animals that die have consumed resources that do not go into the food chain. By far, pre-harvest waste is a bigger waste than post-harvest. And yet, if we save all the waste and feed it, we still cannot feed those additional people and meet those additional demands. So we have to look at efficiency as a way to increase supply. It's all those other solutions, the reduction of overindulgence, those are all part of the solution, but they're not the total solution. We must produce more, and we must produce more with less resources. That is the definition of efficiency. So my concluding point is that efficiency is necessary in order to increase the supply. We have to increase the supply, not just conserve the supply. And in order to reduce environmental footprint of food production, we absolutely must have efficiency, because we don't have any more resources to draw on that are somewhere in a depot somewhere that are not being used. Without the ability to do this, we will lead to competition for food, and competition for food is what causes civil strife, whether it's political strife or just social unrest. If you look around the world today, the unrest we see is often due to lack of food. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Ladies and gentlemen, many in this room may have heard of a lady by the name of Lesley Lambert. Lesley is recently renamed. Like Roger, is a newlywed, although two different people, I assume. A keen lover of horses, a new and keen scuba diver, I think, scuba diving, and a keen horsewoman. Ladies and gentlemen, it is really exciting for us as GRSB to actually be able to engage our members around animal welfare. Lesley comes, we've known each other for a number of years now through some work in other forums, through the United Nations Global Agenda, and again here at the GRSB. And her ability to engage positively on animal welfare is something that's rare and needed in the debates and discussions that we have at the GRSB. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Lesley Mitchell.
Ian is very kind, especially after I think I gave him the unsettling image of when I said I was a diver. He thought I was a high diver. No, fish and shipwrecks. So I'm going to talk a little bit from, I'm a scientist by background, so I'm going to talk a little bit from the evidence, but also from the heart, because what I've heard from all of you over the last day or so is the passion and the motivation and the absolute commitment you have to building sustainable livestock. And I think that's the core goal that we're all talking about here. The other thing that I would say is I would agree and echo what Roger says about the absolute challenges and goals we have to ensure that the world is nourished and that people have the food that they need to move forward, and the place of livestock and the place of meat within that. So, of course, we need to be good at what we do. We need to be productive. We need to be economically viable, and there's no space for waste anymore. But the picture is bigger than it maybe was 30 or 40 years ago, when it was about producing more, as much as we could. We're fundamentally looking through the sustainability lens, and those goals and those metrics have changed. We need to integrate all aspects of sustainability when we're taking forward an approach to the future of livestock. Bringing in public health, of course, I'll say animal welfare, it's why I'm here, but livelihoods, the future of generations, people, whether they be smallholders, family farmers, or those working in big industrial agriculture, who are building the future of their families off of the back of the work that they do. This approach of joined-up, integrated, sustainable livestock, so not just looking at what is efficient, but what is looking at what is effective across a range of key goals, is the approach that's been taken across the world. The global agenda for sustainable livestock looks across species and across stakeholders, from governments and industry to academia and NGOs, to representatives of civil society and those who might otherwise be disenfranchised by the debate. And the approach they have taken to efficiency is fundamentally about saying we need to deliver efficiency, but we need to see it through the lens of social impact, environmental impact, animal welfare impact alongside it. And rather than looking at efficiency alone, those solutions are not going to be fit for purpose for what the world expects. They need to be effective solutions, not just efficient. This is echoed when you look at some of the approaches that the world has taken to development. So the responsible agricultural investment principles, the World Bank safeguards. And this is the demand of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, that were referenced yesterday when we were looking at the Brazilian Forum. It's about meeting the challenges of poverty and hunger, and challenges across these realms, but not simply looking at producing more with less, full stop. It's what consumers want, not just in the developed world, but as economies grow. And as Roger mentions, as economies grow and people have more choice about what they eat and want to eat more protein, they also want those other values of environmental protection, animal welfare and so on, and they want those delivered together. And those solutions aren't necessarily going to be about doing the most with the least. So this makes it a wicked problem. And I love wicked problems because they bring in the mavericks. Somebody said to me yesterday, oh, you know, I'm seen as a bit of a maverick. But it's the mavericks who come up with the answers. It's not going to be about trade-offs between one system and another, about trade-offs against can you make the most. It's going to be about looking for the solutions that are win-wins. So can we deliver good livelihoods? Can we deliver good production? Enough. Not the most, enough. Can we deliver it whilst delivering against all these other values that we see? So it's about real animal welfare, it's about real livelihoods, it's about real environmental protection. And Cameron, if you would excuse me, I'm going to quote one of the things that you said yesterday. Failure in any one area can make you unsustainable. And perhaps turning that on its head, achieving one aspect of sustainability is not going to make you sustainable, and it certainly isn't going to make you sustainable in the eyes of the world. So as we go forward, we need to look at the solutions for the future that we want. If we push efficiency alone, we won't get the solutions that we need. And if we push efficiency alone, we'll get solutions, but at what cost? So I say to you, in the discussions that you have here already, you have already proposed that efficiency is not enough. Yes, we need to be efficient, but as part of being effective, of optimising sustainable livestock in future to deliver against what society wants and what the world needs and what our future generations need. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you, Lesley. Ladies and gentlemen, the next speaker is, it's an honour to have him here, and that's why he's our capstone speaker at the end of the event. He's the General Director for Animal Marine Sciences at Wageningen. I hope I'll get even that remotely close. University in the Netherlands. He's a keen outdoorsman. His favourite, I've got to try and pronounce this right, Ajax football team, for which he actually played as a younger man. He's got 3 kids, and very excited to have you here to respond and provide rebuttal as well as deepen the discussion. Dr. Martin Scholten.
Okay, thank you for giving me the word. Dear sustainable beef friends, I have to admit that I agree with Lesley when it comes to the good care for animal welfare, for Mother Nature, for the livelihood of the future people. But I do not agree with her in projecting the efficiency as a burden for animals, people, or nature. And let me try to explain that. Animals are not suffering in an efficient agri-food system. On the contrary, animal welfare is the cornerstone. Only with the good animal welfare, efficiency, real efficiency, is secured. Do not mix up efficiency with the old-style intensification. Also in extensive systems, organic systems, or what else, efficiency is crucial. Moreover, efficiency is not a technocratic, artificial way of misusing animals. It's a pure nature-based principle. And I want to explain that. And to understand me, you have to know that I'm an ecologist. An ecologist living in livestock production, but in the basic, I'm an ecologist. Life on Earth is based on resource use efficiency. Plenty of sunlight drives the ecosystem to produce life. Mineral resources, water and land are the limiting factors. The ecosystem has evolved over the years in a system based on adaptation and interactions to ensure, the most efficient use of land and its resources. And animals play a crucial role in mobilizing the resources from plant production to optimize the protein production per hectare of land. And they close the cycle more rapidly as their digestion is in an efficient microbiological decay, releasing manure to feed the soil fertility. In nature, there is no linearity. Natural systems are by nature circular. As mankind, we were blind for that. Our mindset is often in a linear way of thinking. Ecology is the science to unravel the nature of nature, and we can be inspired by the ecological principles in nature. Agri-food systems are not more or less than parts of Mother Earth's ecosystem. It's a way to stimulate the natural ecosystem to produce more by filling the yield gap by cultivation. And that's fully in line with the character of nature, optimizing the production rate by efficiency. So why is efficiency and related intensification seen as a bad choice? Or even less understandable, why is the so-called ecological agriculture often seen for inefficiency in their practice? And fully misunderstood, why do people think that a purely plant-based agro-food system is more sustainable than a mixed system with plant and animal production like the natural ecosystem? leading to the misconception that the vegetarian diet is a sustainable diet. Systems based on linear resource use intensification are not the future. These linear production systems are based on a generic view of maximizing productivity, not precisely adapted to the local conditions, what's available. And that's the cause of the trade-offs of that system. Resource depletion with large environmental footprints, animal health and welfare problems. That's not efficiency. That's actually inefficiency in the trade-offs related to high production. With the ecological knowledge of today, we can reconstruct the beef system in a more adaptive and by that more efficient system together with the other agro systems forming an agro-ecological system. With a zero environmental footprint as the man on the moon to drive innovation towards real sustainability. A circular ecosystem as an integral part of bio-based society fitting in our planet Earth. And animal production is needed in that design. We have 37% of land reserved for food production. We can double our food production on this piece of land, or even more, if we improve our practice in ecological land use, which is not other than efficiency. How? By smart efficiency at agro-food system level. Making use of all the plant-based protein production for sustainable nutrition security, next to other bio-based products that the bio-based society, the sun-driven society, requires. Mobilizing the proteins from plant materials can best be done, can be most efficiently be done by making use of the properties of livestock animals. They can digest the plant materials, called feed, and transforming it into nutritious food for mankind, and the fuel for the bio-based society in the form of manure, fuel to enrich the soil. Livestock production can be reframed in that direction, closing the cycle, making optimal use of the feed resources to produce nutritious food and producing high-quality manure as feed for the nutritious soil. And that requires happy animals, animals that are in a good shape, animals that have a good welfare, animals that have a good health, that make the best use of their genetic diversity for adaptation to conditions, breeding for traits optimizing that role in the food cycle, feeding the genes with nutritious feed and the help of a healthy gut microbiome. So last but not least, good care for the animals improve their resilience. And with the help of sensorics to monitor 24/7 the behavior of animals, as early indicators for animal welfare care and early diagnostics for preventive animal management, we really can foster the animals. Animal welfare go hand in hand with more efficiency. Animals are the friend of more efficiency at system level. I will come to an end. I will finish. Please notice that care for animals, nature and livelihood are cornerstones that can be realized with efficiency. Please understand and believe me, we need a higher efficiency in combination with that best care for animals, nature and the livelihood of people. It's really the only key for the gateway towards sustainable nutrition security. So please let us not debate on how important efficiency is. Efficiency is important. We can produce for the human demands for proteins and other nutritious food in less agricultural land than we're using now. In my opinion, that means livelihood for future people. Less animal production means less animal production means less efficiency at the agro-ecosystem level. That means that we need more land for nutrition security through plant proteins. So let's keep the system in its complete sense with a closed loop using the animals. As Lesley said, there is no space for waste. Animals are the friend to help to reduce waste. Animals help to be efficient because waste is only a matter of inefficiency. And let's turn away from that false discourse that abandoning livestock production is the best way to save the planet, to save the people, and to save no profits. Efficiency is the fit for purpose to meet the expectations from planet, people, and profit. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker comes to us with an interesting and intriguing set of skills, knowledge and experience. Trained as a chef and an educator in the culinary world, she perhaps has spoken to more customers about the food they eat when they eat it than many of us have. She's heard those insights and she's responded directly by walking back into the kitchen and doing that. She also comes with a family ranching background in Florida. In fact, she was on the ranch in Florida last week when we spoke. And she's Executive Director of the American Grassfed Association. Ladies and gentlemen, Carrie Balcom.
Good morning. I just wanted to say thank you to Roger for pointing out that I'm glad to be part of the growing population that I'm just getting ready to enter, those over 70. My great-great-grandfather came to the United States on a cattle boat from Mallorca, Spain, many years ago, got off in Key West and never got back on. There are two rumors, one of which is that he was shipwrecked, the other was he had a little too much to drink and never got back on the boat. Can you imagine a cattle boat in that era? I think just getting off the boat was good enough. I come to this as an alternative system. We're pasture-based production, and in 2003 in the United States, pasture-based production, grass-fed, became part of the lexicon of part of the beef industry. It's an alternative system, and one way we look at it is that anything that brings people back to eating meat and beef, we're going to be part of, and that's very important to know. It's not an us versus them mentality. We don't have that. It's been an interesting 13, 14 years in the industry. We've seen rapid growth, as you know, 30%. They say is in whoever they are saying that we have 30% growth in the last 10 years. Ruminants have a great ability to convert cellulose to energy, which we don't have. So putting animals back on grass and doing mob grazing, or what Peter Vick yesterday called amp grazing, is putting more animals back on the land in less space. That's an efficient way to do that. There are other efficiencies with other production methods, but I'll talk about the one that I know most. It's not only about efficiency in animal production, but it's reclamation of land, regenerative land. It's also regenerating rural economies. It's keeping families on family farms. So those are all things that we look at as the whole picture of what we're attempting to do. The increase in soil fertility, as Peter spoke about yesterday, is important because, again, we can produce more with less. We have the president of the American Grass-Fed Association has a farm in South Georgia, and it's White Oak Pastures. And I'll talk just a little bit about him. About 10 years ago, he was highly efficient with cow-calf. He'd always made money at it. And he had an epiphany and said, I'm going to go back to the land and change things. And he went to a completely pasture-based production system. He has, Peter's just done a film on him called 100,000 Beating Hearts. He has 2 on-farm abattoirs. He has red meat abattoir and also poultry. He has closed system, we call it from birth to barcode. He produces everything on farm. He, about 7 years ago, they cut a road through his farm, and after what he had been doing, he had 7 inches of organic matter that he had increased his farm. So his soil efficiency is so much better. He has anaerobic digesters on his farm. Anyway, I could talk for days about this gentleman, but what I'm trying to say is that he's in probably one of the most economically depressed areas in the United States. He now employs 130 people on his farm. He has rebuilt the town. So those are really important things to the people that are doing pasture-based production in the United States. As far as animal welfare, animals on pasture, that's where they're supposed to be, and eating cellulose and those kind of things. And we do have people in the production system who do not have the land mass to do completely pasture-based, 100% pasture-based production, but they're feeding on pasture. So increasing soil fertility and decreasing inputs is very important to them. So, again, sustainability is a journey, not a destination. We're all moving towards different efficiencies, and using that term, efficient means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It's like the term sustainable, which you all have defined. We have 3.5 billion hectares of grazing lands on Earth that we need to use efficiently, and putting animals back on that land. And I agree that plant-based production diets is not an efficient way to feed the masses. It has to be, we can't create monocultures. We have to create biodiverse permacultures, and putting all of those things together. And the tunnel view of a plant-based only diet is not part of what we believe is going to be efficient in the long run and to feed the masses as we move forward. I'm again with, there was a lady yesterday said the word plate waste. And there's a lot of food waste, as we all talk about, and we need to, it's 40% in the United States, so we need to address that as part of the sustainable movement as we move forward. As you know from what I said in my background, with a culinary background, we deal a lot with chefs and food waste and how to make efficient use of the animals that they're putting on the plates to serve you, and how that moves forward. And teaching other culinarians as we move forward that's important, to understand the importance of no waste and whole carcass utilization and all of those things. So as we move forward into the next phase of the conversation, I just want you all to know that we're here to be part of the solution, and it's just an alternative system to other systems moving forward. And I just appreciate the opportunity to be part of this conversation, and I look forward to the rest of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. We're now going to move into final comments. I'm going to encourage both team captains, as you provide the final comments, to focus on providing rebuttal. But let's get into the bits where we differ and find out if we really differ. There's a couple of points I've taken away so far that I'd like to explore. Roger, you mentioned that we only use 1/3 of the planet for food, fibre and livestock production. I challenge the word only in that sense. I also challenge the idea as an Australian, and the Brazilians, Argentinians and Africans might agree also, that grass-fed is an alternative system. So, ladies and gentlemen, to provide that full rebuttal and closing comments for both teams, I'll first ask the captain of the affirmative to try and close his argument and prove to us that chasing efficiency will lead to positive and social outcomes. Roger Cady.
So some of these comments prepared prior to the debate, some of them in response to colleagues over here. First of all, I think we all agree that's the reason we're in the room, that sustainability is about continuous improvement. I've found through my 10 years in working to sustainability, that's the one term that everybody can rally around, is continuous improvement. What was considered sustainable 50 years ago is no longer considered sustainable today. I have a slide of outmoded, no longer produced technology that was the state of the art in the early 1900s and 1920s. So times change, technology changes, methods change. What was sustainable or what is sustainable today will not be necessarily considered sustainable tomorrow. So it is about the journey. It's not about the goal. This is a journey. This is a continuous process. There must be continuous improvement. That continuous improvement needs to be measured not by prescription, not by how we do it, but by what the outcome is. To provide prescriptions means at some point, even if it's considered sustainable today, it will not be considered sustainable tomorrow. I'll give you an example. Science is not static. Science builds over time, and it's the body of the evidence that dictates what comes out of the science. And we used to believe, I'm an animal scientist, trained out as an animal scientist, trained primarily as a geneticist, but I did take nutrition courses. And we used to believe that we pushed production. And we used to talk about balancing rations to improve production. And that was the push theory. What we've come to realize is that nutrition does not push. We actually can hurt animals by overfeeding them certain nutrients. And what happens when an animal is able to perform well, that actually improves what they eat, how much they eat. They increase their, we call it dry matter intake, they increase their dietary intake according to what they need to produce, or what their genetic blueprint says they can produce. So that's a change in the understanding of how biology works only in the last 20 years since I went to school. It's also something I think that we've forgotten. Even in animal science, we've forgotten about the maintenance of living. I often use human examples when I talk to people because a lot of people I talk to are not animal scientists. They never even have been on a farm. I use the human examples. How many in this room know what basal metabolism is or have heard the term? It's basically what requires to thrive. In the animal world, we call that maintenance. How much food is required for the animal to thrive? That is the way the food that the animal takes in is used first, is for ability to live and to live well, live healthily. Those all fall into maintenance. The production functions which produce meat, milk, and eggs are growth, meat, reproduction, eggs, lactation, milk. If an animal is not being fed appropriately, those functions are non-obligatory functions for the survival of that animal, and they will shut down. The same way a child who's growing, who does not get enough food will stop growing. The same way a nursing mother who does not get enough food will stop nursing. Bodies are pre-programmed to thrive. And so we cannot create efficiency without looking first towards the health of an animal. Another point I would like to make is that pasture-based production, if well managed, is an efficient use of resources. One of the things I criticize the beef industry for is it not telling the stories that we heard on the tours. The tours were all about the use of the land. People, believe it or not, when they hear corn-fed beef, believe that that animal started receiving only corn when they were about 2 days old and lived on that corn their entire life. Please tell the story that beef cattle live on grass for usually at least 3/4 of their life. It's an efficient use. They contribute back, and we heard on the tour how they contribute back. We heard on the tour how once the land was cleared of the what Mr. Caprathard called weeds, which were poplar trees, we heard how the biodiversity came back. That biodiversity is maintained by the beef livestock on those fields, on that area where crops cannot be grown. This area of the world, crops are difficult to grow because of climate. Less than 100 days growing season. I was in Ireland last month, and I could not believe where animals are grazing, sheep and cattle grazing on what all I could see was rock. There were blades of grass between the cracks in those rocks, but that ground can never be cultivated. Yes, a third of the land is used for agricultural row crop production, fruit production, vegetable production, but 70% of the land is grazing land that cannot be converted into agricultural land for human consumption, and therefore animals provide a valuable resource in converting that land that cannot be used for human consumption of food into food that enriches our diets and provides service back to and health of the land. So I'm going to close by saying labeling, not in terms of the labels that we put on the products that we sell in the retail store, but labeling our agricultural practices as whether it be organic, natural, grass-fed, conventional, whatever label you want to come up with, and start pitting those against each other and saying one is better than the other is not going to make progress for us. Every one of those systems have benefits. Every one of those systems can be better. And it's about increasing the effectiveness instead of the efficiency. Think of effectiveness and efficiency. Efficiency contributes to effectiveness. And every one of those practices can be better. And I think that's what we all need to strive for, is continuous improvement. And efficiency is part of that story. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. And for closing comments on the negative side, and to prove that chasing efficiency will lead to positive social and environmental outcomes may not be a true statement. Lesley.
Okay, so we could probably stand up here and ferociously agree, but part of what Ian has tasked me to do is to disagree. So I'm going to look narky now. So I think the key point here is that, of course, efficiency is part of the picture, but we need to be effective, we need to optimise. And I hear that. I hear effectiveness coming from Roger's mouth in the rebuttal. So thank you, Roger, for taking that on board. But I think I also hear from Martin, and this was the key point for me, a redefining of what efficiency is. That efficiency isn't just input-output. How much can we get out of how little? But taking on board that wider picture of what makes input-output work. But not just that, that we have to be efficient in achieving those other outcomes of environmental, animal welfare, livelihoods concerns. So I'm just going to put this through a couple of other lenses, because part of us having this conversation is not for the sake of listening to the sound of our own voices. Although I have to say, if Roger could read my book at bedtime story, he has such a beautiful voice. Sorry, really, really wonderful voice. So I'm just going to frame this in a slightly different way. We need to be careful if we are redefining efficiency as efficiency plus these other key goals of the world, because I don't think that the world has redefined it as such. I think it will redefine it in terms of things like carbon metrics. And that scares me, because the amazing pasture-based farmers who are using the land incredibly, improving soil quality, building soil for generations upon generations, and enabling us to get from the land protein and product and nutrition, as well as all of those other components, you may not be seen as efficient enough. You may have additional, if we have carbon taxes, and it's tax per unit of carbon that is seen to be produced through whichever metrics, you may be seen as less efficient. And God save us if we lose those farmers who are able to make the most out of what they have, So let's be very careful about how we define efficiency. I also wonder what the debate would look like if we looked through other lenses of efficiency. And I sat in one 3 weeks ago where proponents of plant-based diets fundamentally talked about the inefficiency of livestock. So the other part of that debate. And that was in a policy roundtable. So they were talking about the inefficiency of putting protein and calories through animals to gain an output of protein and calories. And talking about the cost of that in terms of those other goals. So environmental degradation and so on. So I'm just saying we need to be very careful how we talk about efficiency. It means different things to different people. It will be used as a scorecard and as a proponent of very different debates, very differently in different debates. I also spend quite a lot of time sitting in the poultry industry, and for the last 5-10 years, they will sit there and say, we are the most efficient. We can make the most out of the least. Don't buy beef. In fact, maybe not wipe beef off the planet, but we are the ones who are going to produce the future. Where we are developing in South Asia and Latin America, we need to develop poultry, not ruminant production. So again, I would say be careful what you wish for if you push just for efficiency. So we need, within this picture, to look at those goals that we want to achieve. Perhaps there's a more localized way of looking at efficiency. How can you make the most out of the land that you have, but in a way that, as Carrie says, provides livelihoods, employment, resilience of the land for future generations, and good, optimal output. And that's what I see when I've come here to Canada. That's what you are doing. Those farms that we saw were incredibly inspiring. And as Roger says, and here I will completely agree, we have to tell those stories. Those stories are not of efficiency alone. Now, the point of this debate is not, again, for us to win, although I was quite keen. I'm a competitive person, so I wanted you guys to vote. Damn, you're not going to. But the point here is for you to open up the discussion, to think about how this affects you, to think about how others will be interpreting this outside of this room. And I hope it's inspiring enough that you will be able to take that back and to have that conversation and to see where we agree and disagree and how we can take it forward. So thank you for listening, especially as it is so early in the morning. Thank you very much. And the debate is yours now.
Thank you, Lesley. And now I know why that after those midnight calls down in Australia I fall asleep so quickly. It's the sweet dulcet tone of Roger Cady. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now your chance to challenge the debaters. We have a number of microphones. This will be now an open panel session. Now, the problem we have as a GRSB is more often than not we are bringing people of very balanced views into the room. Hence, there's a lot in agreement rather than disagreement. But I encourage you to challenge them. I encourage you to put forward your thoughts in debate, and feel free to debate the comments shared around the room as well.
Thanks to everybody for speaking. It was an interesting introduction to the day. I don't know if any of you, in your research for this, found a document by the Food Climate Research Network called Lean, Green, Mean and Obscene. What is efficiency and is it sustainable? Quite a useful, well, I say quite useful. It's 48 pages long, and it's very useful if you're suffering from insomnia. The problem with the document is they're trying to suggest that efficiency is not a worthwhile target to pursue. And their problem is they don't define it. And I'd like to ask Martin if he could define efficiency in the way that he was just talking about, in a fairly concise way, so that we have a definition of efficiency that fits in with those circular agro-ecosystems that he was talking about. But I recommend that document if you are trying to get to sleep when you're traveling overseas or something.
Yeah, thank you for this question. For me, efficiency is, when it comes to sustainable nutrition security, which is mainly protein security. Sustainability, efficiency is the maximum amount of proteins that you can produce on a hectare of agricultural land without depleting the resources. More or less, that's for me efficiency. And let me give a prospect. If we want to, I did that calculation, if we want to feed the protein security, the protein needs of the world, we need 3 planet Earths where there is no room for nature to serve the basic needs for proteins. That's not the way that we want to go for. That's inefficient land use, and land is the limiting factor. Land with the natural resources, water, nutrients. Don't forget the soil, which is the land. That's where it's all about. So efficiency is that we use the land that we need for food production the best as possible. The highest food production at the limited possible amount of land. And then there is land enough. Well, I'm an ecologist. Then planet Earth can drive the natural ecosystem without problems. For us, we are here in Banff, in one of the most beautiful natural spots in the world. That's where what we as mankind need for livelihood. And we can combine that with good food, because that's also what mankind needs for livelihood. Thank you.
I want to ask this team, does that definition work?
The only thing is that, yes, we need to get the most amount of food production off with the least amount of resources, but we have to do it without the waste. We've got, and I can't speak for the world, but in the United States it's 40% food waste once it gets produced. We've got to stop that. We've got to figure out how to either utilize that or stop producing it so that we can be more efficient.
So as a definition of efficiency, it works as a definition of efficiency. And within that context, it tells me everything about why we can't look just at efficiency. Because what's missing from that definition? Those other goals of sustainability that you're trying to achieve. You can't assume that one will lead to the other. The idea that a productive animal is an animal in good welfare, that's, if you look, maybe it would work for beef. For chicken, no. Bigger leg problems, bigger heart issues, massive issues in terms of if you're going to stock animals more intensively. Equally, if you look at that from the point of view of increasing feed conversion and raising animals highly stocked and feeding them grain, perhaps that's more efficient? No, not necessarily. The key thing for me is that we need to look at those goals.
I think the example you give is for me an example of inefficiency. Mm-hmm. So if you have unhealthy animals that are not productive, or that are unhealthy, there is mortality amongst the animals when there is really the big problems in the animals, you're not fulfilling my definition of efficiency towards sustainability, because in that hectare of land, in that square meter of a poultry cage, you could do much better with good care for the animals. And then you're producing more proteins. There is a one-to-one correlation, animal welfare and the food production of the animals. And that means that the false is that input-output, if we think in linear terms, if we only think in input is feed and output is my product, that's not efficiency.
That is an interesting question, because that is something we hear a lot. Our animals, we look after animals so we gain. So the challenge that a productive animal is the same as a healthy animal is an interesting challenge. Roger.
I would like to add a word that hasn't come up yet, and that word is appropriate. Appropriate use of resources, appropriate use of what is this land suitable for? Some land is suitable for crop production. Some land is not suitable for crop production. Some areas of the world are suitable for cattle. Some areas are not. We as a global population have imposed geopolitical or political boundaries around our countries. And one of the big discussions and one of the areas as I talk around the world that I need to be very sensitive to is self-sufficiency. Countries want to be self-sufficient in food production. And yet some countries are not suitable for the kinds of food that they may want to eat. It does not make sense. I'm just going to pick on the United States because then I'm not picking on any other country. It does not make sense to try to grow lettuce to feed the country of the United States in a place like New York State when we have the San Joaquin Valley in California, which is far more suited to lettuce production. It does not make sense, and dairy farmers in the United States are recognized, it does not make sense to try to ask dairy cows to produce effectively in the southeastern part of the United States where they can't tolerate the humidity that goes along with the heat there. And so one of the challenges in terms of efficiency of food production on a global sense is the appropriate place to grow food and grow food in the highest and best place where that's the highest and best use of that property, that land. Other places, the highest and best use, I spent a long time in New Hampshire. The highest and best use of the land in New Hampshire was not for grazing cattle. It was for trees and for the wildlife that exists in those trees. So when it comes to efficiency, we have to understand where the appropriate place for food, regardless of whether it's a crop or an animal, where the appropriate place to grow that animal is in order to get the efficiency that we need in order to produce the food that's required.
Thank you, Roger. We have one over here.
Good morning.
Introduce yourself, please.
Yep. My name is Dutch Kuiper. I'm the CEO of Parker Ranch. We're about 20,000 cows in our cow-calf operation. What I think is interesting about this debate, in terms of our experience, it may be unique, is we began a shift over the last 5 years to move away from the commodity business. We're still in the commodity business, so we're a price taker. But we've built out a grass-fed program, so we have about 5,000 animals in that program now. What's interesting is the animals in the traditional commodity program are coming in around $12.50. The grass-fed animals coming in around $11.50. But the price we're seeing in terms of the value per pound of that grass-fed animal is much greater than the differential in the loss in weight. And so to me, what's interesting about this whole debate is, for us, it may be a unique experience. We reduced our cow-calf operation, so our overall production in terms of volume has gone down, but our margins have gone up. And so I think the input-output question is an interesting question, but it seems that there's multiple markets that maybe didn't exist 10 years ago. So you have an informed consumer that's interested, that has that discretionary dollar, that wants to buy the adjective. And then you've got the commodity business that's very focused on cost. That's just our experience.
Thank you, and I think it's an experience that is well mirrored. I guess the challenge in that, though, is often we see the debate, we use efficiency as an argument for trying to get rid of the adjectives. We should trust all farmers and allow them to use efficient technologies and so on. So the fact that the market and using that adjective adds value that allows you to do that, I think is a neat outcome. Any comments from the, or we move on to Sherry? Sure.
All right. My question is also coming from a producer perspective. Firstly, Lesley, I'll forgive you for calling my place a farm, but that's beside the point. The reality is, we as producers, I used to call myself not a cattle rancher, but in fact a grass farmer. And what I'm actually learning through my local forage association is it's even more finite than that. I need to be looking at the soils. So if I, as a producer, am not searching constantly or going for the efficiency from every layer of that ecosystem that I deal in, at the end of the day, I can't make any money. If I don't strive for efficiency and gaining as much as I possibly can out of that soil, out of that grass, out of the health and well-being of that animal that's surviving on that ecosystem itself, on the environment around me, because if I'm not focusing on gaining as maximum efficiency on all those, on soil and grass, then I'm somewhere going to be losing in riparian areas as well. This is all about searching for maximum efficiency, because if not, there's no profitability. And at the end of the day, if I can't make money as a producer, then we can't produce food for the world. So how would you respond?
I sympathise. I was called a rancher, not a cattleman, so terminology. Lesley, you respond first.
I missed the first part of it, and sorry if I called you something I shouldn't, if that was the case. No, I mean, I think you frame it perfectly in the sense of efficiency is not, bad, it's not wrong, it's the fundament of how you will create a viable business, but it's not the only thing. And I think one of the key things for me, maybe putting it through a different lens as well, in response to the previous speaker, is what we include in efficiency. And what will investors, for example, what will those within the markets include within efficiency? And within an effective system, they want more from this. So what I hear from you, Sherry, is what you're able to achieve is not just efficiency now. It's not a short-term lens. It's efficiency in terms of how you create something that is viable for the future. You're not just trying to use it up and spit it out. You're creating a business that is going to keep you going. And for me, that is efficiency plus those other elements, and plus the other elements of social license, for example, that we've talked about here, that allow you to exist in the market.
I guess your point's a key one, Sherry, in the fact, and I want to come to you, Carrie, on this. The problem with efficiency, as it's viewed outside our industry, is efficiency has led to unnatural production systems.
Yep.
The great thing about your system is it's fully efficient in the natural system. It's on natural grasslands and so on. It's the Grassfed approach. I guess the thing I want to ask you, Carrie, is when does, in the US system, how do we compare that, unnatural system, the confined feeding, the feedlots, and the grass-fed, and also recognise that while you talked about suitable land use before, the biggest threat to the grasslands here in the US is feeding corn, is growing corn to feed to animals that are best suited to be there. So how does this circular discussion rear its head here in the US, Carrie?
There are two things that I want to say. First of all, is that there are, take our own family ranch as an example, is that the only market that we have to sell into is a conventional market. We don't have an alternative market. There's nobody that is buying grass-fed cattle. And we're not talking about unfed or cull cattle to feed into that market, but 100% grass-fed cattle coming off the land. So until we create that processing and getting it to market, then that's the only market that we have. As far as efficiencies, they're two different systems. I don't know how you can say this one's and this one. I'm at a loss. I mean,
Ian.
I don't know how to make that. There's no. It's not a comparison. It's not an either or. They have to be, and they're not competitive systems. There are competitive systems, but they're not competitive systems. Because if you only have one market to sell into, there's no competition.
Ian, so efficiency is not about using up resources. In fact, it's about conserving resources. And the tour on Sherry's ranch, I'm going to quote a couple things you said on the tour. Sherry mentioned that she looks at every layer of the soil and what it can produce, not to use it up, but also to be able to replenish it. The other thing she said is we don't have room on this farm, on this ranch, for cows that are heavier than 1,400 pounds because they can't sell enough weaned calves off those cattle in order to pay for them. That is a look at she's looking at efficiencies all over in her system. She also said that on the other ranch, we learned about calving out cows at 2 years of age instead of 3 years of age. So there's efficiencies being looked at all through the system, not to use up resources, but to conserve and replenish resources.
Hi, Christian Artuso of Bird Studies Canada, and I live in Manitoba, Canada, just east of here. Since this is a debate, I thought I'll take on your challenge there and throw a few spanners in the works, perhaps. But I'm not trying to espouse any one position. I'm just trying to embrace what you tried to accomplish, sir. So I think that's great. And so let's take a look at this word efficiency a little bit more here, because on this planet, when the sun's energy is converted into food, we all know how that works, how photosynthesis is at the root of that. And we all know how the food web works, and with the losses at every stage of the food web. And so those people who make those arguments about plant-based diet and so on see those losses at each stage of conversion. And for them, it is fundamentally less efficient to eat meat, because that's one step removed, and that's one loss of energy that's less efficient. Those arguments are based in ecology, and I'm also an ecologist. But the thing about the food web is that is in fact the source of biodiversity. It's the source of life on this planet. And that inefficiency in the food web is what gives us this extraordinary planet. And why I, who am passionate about birds, have a chance to watch nearly 11,000 species of birds on this planet. If this was an efficient system, that biodiversity would not exist. And we saw some interesting examples of that. For example, on the tour yesterday, the rancher's perspective of an elk, if you remember, he said, an elk grazes like a horse. It's very inefficient. He is absolutely correct in that. But the inefficient grazing of the elk is actually what produces the heterogeneity in the grass. And it's that heterogeneity that allows different species to occupy a different ecological niche. And it's that ecological niche that allows them to have a diverse community. And it's that grassland community that I am here to conserve. And for me, the reason why I am interested in eating and selling beef is in fact to preserve that biodiversity. But that only exists through inefficiency. For me, inefficiency is a beautiful thing. And I understand. I'm not here to criticize the producer. I was amazed. I was blown away yesterday by what we saw. When a farmer tells me, and I'm sorry if I use that word wrongly, but 80% native grass on his land and he's grazing year-round, that is mind-boggling. That is awesome. That is achieving the biodiversity goals that I am here today to work towards. And I will happily buy, sell, consume, even be a salesperson for that product. But the fact of the matter is, many people perceive efficiency, as you just so correctly commented, sir, and many people associate efficiency with other failed systems or experiments or other systems that may have produced, let's say, more food per hectare or any of those metrics, but which created other problems. So let me ask maybe all the panelists if maybe the word efficiency is, when we go forward and try to sell what beef production is to the world who sees those other things, and to people like me from the NGO community, from the bird-watching community, whatever you want to call us, who are here in support of beef because it supports a community of grassland birds which would not exist in the Great Plains of North America without beef production. Basically, these grasslands are only here because of grazing. It was once bison. Sadly, we don't have bison, but we do. We can use beef production to stimulate that biodiversity and to maintain that biodiversity. So my question is efficiency the right word that you want to use to sell your product? If I'm the person that you're marketing to, maybe it isn't. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have just a couple of minutes, so Martin, I'll go to you first for a response. Or not?
I didn't have the full, so if you can wrap up.
If I can wrap up. So, and thank you, it's a very unique view. That the inefficiency in the natural system is what gives us the diversity that allows us to farm it efficiently, especially on that pasture-based system. So how do we, when pushing for efficiency, allow the inefficiency in the natural systems to remain?
Yeah, I do not really believe if there is inefficiency in systems. There is high diversity in environmental conditions, and that leads to a high diversity in life adapted to those diversity in the environmental conditions, and that keeps the diversity going on. So actually, I fully agree with you that we should not go for a kind of agriculture that we developed in the past, which is too much monolithic. There is a lot of diversity in, for instance, the livestock species that we have around the world. Much more than we are using at the moment, because we only use those genes for traits like productivity, efficiency in the old way. But if we redefine efficiency more from a system level, and I could not fully heard your language, but I think I understand you, that from a systems way of thinking, we need the diversity in the agro-food system as well, adapted to the local conditions. But if we do that, we can really contribute to the biodiversity. What to think of a well-managed soil is even as important as a well-managed animal to come up with the high level of efficiency to take best of the land that we can do. Not depleting the land, not depleting the soil, not depleting the resources, not depleting the biodiversity. Thank you.
I might jump to this side and then back.
I think 2 points. I think it's a really interesting view. And one of the reasons I think we're in a place where we can talk about redefining efficiency is because we value these different things. We value the biodiversity. We value these other aspects of sustainability. And actually that's key because then we are moving away from an old version of efficiency. I don't think the rest of the world has at all. So we need to pull that forward. That takes me to the second point, which is most of the debate around efficiency in livestock ends up pointing back actually to that paper that Rory mentioned. And I kind of came into this thinking, it's going to be we might ferociously agree, we might ferociously disagree, but it's an hour and a half. I wonder if there's enough knowledge and perspective in this room to actually bring some of that forward into the debate around the future of farming and the future of livestock. And we should perhaps collate that and get that out there, get that as a product of this discussion, because there is a lot of incredibly useful knowledge, understanding, redefining concept in here. So that would be my challenge is if there is the will, that's something that we should take from this room and this discussion.
Roger.
I don't view biodiversity as being the antithesis of efficiency. I think that's a setup of two words that are not opposite. I mentioned I'm a geneticist by training. A geneticist makes improvement because of diversity in the gene pool. Without diversity, improvement can't be made. Sustainability is about continuous improvement. It's not just about genetics. I'm just using that as a metaphor. Without diversity, we cannot make improvement. So I come back to the words of appropriate use. Diversity is important to improvement, and we're about continuous improvement. That's what sustainability is about. But I'm going to come back to a very hard reality. 9 billion people is more than 7 billion people is more than 3 billion people. We still have fixed resources, some of them not renewable. We need to know how to feed an appropriate diet to those 9 billion people. And there's topics embedded in there that nobody's willing to talk about. But the fact is 9 billion people take more resources than 7 billion do.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's now morning tea time, or break time. I don't think you have morning tea here. I get laughed at in Brazil for using that terminology. I want to thank our speakers. I want to thank you for your input. At 10 o'clock, the conference will reconvene in the breakout rooms rather than here. So please read your agenda to find out where you want to go. And if you could join me in thanking with applause our debaters.